Yeah, I'm really, as a longtime advisor of the Anthro Club, I'm really proud of all the things that they do and the events that they put on. So, my name is Michael DiGiovine. I'm a professor of anthropology here at Westchester University and also the director of our Museum of Anthropology and Archaeology. And right now, we have an exhibition up, actually on Paul Stoller's work with witchcraft and spirit possession and sorcery among the Songhai of Niger. So that's an old library, and I urge you to check it out. And in conjunction with the museum and that exhibition, we're really pleased to have Wrenn come today to do a lecture and book signing on his latest memoir, Mothership. I want to extend a special thank you to his publicist, Laura DiGiovine, as well, just to embarrass her, and also who's here, and also just to give a few words about what's going on. So we'll have Greg come up. He's a professor of. Do I have to read this? I can't even read this. He's a professor of English literature at James Madison University, and he's given talks all over the country at Yale and elsewhere on well-being and ayahuasca and sustainability. We're really pleased that this is being co-sponsored by the Office of Sustainability as well as the graduate program in publishing in the English department here and the Center for the Book History. After the talk, we're fortunate to have Paul Stoller come and say a few words about the book as well that he read. And for those of you who don't know Paul, he's a professor of anthropology, soon to be professor emeritus of anthropology here at Westchester. He won the Reitz Prize, which is our version of the Nobel Prize, precisely for his ethnographic writing. I think is one of the major contributions to anthropology that Paul's done. He pioneered the ethnographic novel as a genre. And so it's really nice for all of you all to meet two really important writers, really gifted writers today. So thank you. Without further ado, thanks so much for coming, Greg. I really appreciate it. I didn't have my glasses on, which is why
All right. You can hear me okay, right? Hi. Yes, I'm Wrenn, and I'm really pleased to be here. I do have bookmarks for everybody. I'm nearing the end of the book tour, so I do need to give these away, so feel free to take one. And it's such a pleasure to be here in this room, in this fancy room here at Westchester University. And of course, I want to thank Michael DiGiovine for inviting me. Thank you to the Anthropology Club for co-sponsoring the event. Thank you so much, Paige, for your leadership. And the Office of Sustainability, who also co-sponsored this talk. Really, really appreciate it. It's good to feel welcome. I stand before you not as a therapist or a shaman or a psychedelic evangelist or a scientist with a PhD. I'm none of those things. I'm an English professor. I'm a memoirist. I'm a poet. I'm a science nerd, a Trekkie. I don't know if you know what that is, young people. I hope you do. I'm a scuba diver. I'm a husband. I'm a student of ayahuasca. And like you, I'm a child of Mother Earth. And I think it's fitting that anthropology has been the Department of Anthropology has been so involved in bringing me here because I guess I didn't really think about it, but this book is anthropological in a way. You know, I really was observing other cultures at a remove, whether I was in Indonesia, in Raja Ampat, it's an archipelago in Indonesia on the equator, and it shelters some of the last pristine coral reefs on Earth. I was there, and I went there not to talk to anybody, really to observe nature. And then, of course, going to the Amazon, I got to meet some incredible people who, as sometimes happens in anthropology, my own worldview was shaken. And reading the science around psychedelic therapy also, in a way, shattered my worldview, my sense of what's possible. Because as we know, the mental health system is broken. We know that the planet is in crisis in terms of its climate. And there are some intersections there that I'll be touching on today. So yeah, I mean, I've learned a few things firsthand about the power, the healing power of nature and plant medicines, but it should be said, I did not, I didn't discover this. Indigenous cultures around the world have known it and practiced it for thousands of years. And Western civilization really is the exception, right? We are the weirdos who don't really integrate it into their culture. And so these indigenous cultures around the world, they're among the most vulnerable as our planetary emergency unfolds. And so as we benefit from their ancestral medicines, I think it's really important that those cultures also benefit and that they're protected. Because if it's one thing that I've learned in this journey, you could say, it's the one thing that maybe I've been trying to learn is reciprocity. Reciprocity, right, which is different than, you buy me a piece of pizza and I Venmo you, right? That's a transaction. Reciprocity is different. And so to kind of highlight what reciprocity really means and to kind of allow an indigenous voice to kind of preside over this talk, I did want to offer this quote from Don Jose Campos. He's a very famous ayahuasca curandero, and he writes, "Once when I drank ayahuasca, she very gently explained to me, 'Look, I give to you, but I take away. I take away defects, and I give you responsibilities.'" And so it is the taking away of defects and the giving of responsibilities that I want to discuss today in my talk. We're in, what feels like an impossible situation. This is a battleground state, so it's a different kind of squeeze that you're feeling, perhaps, being here. But in terms of the planet, we're in this race between catastrophe and consciousness. That's how Rick Doblin puts it. This past June was the Earth's 13th straight record hot month. So neuroplasticity, the ability of the brain to rewire itself, is the most hopeful word that I know in the English language. Like, we do have the capacity to change the way we think, and we can change the way, even more importantly, for what I'm going to talk about, how to relate to one another. And we can change that. We know what the default is. We know that really well, what the default is in terms of how we relate to each other these days. But we can return to something much more wholesome, I guess you could say, something that feels a lot better. And so I'll just say that neuroplasticity has been my lived experience as a person, and I'm not special in that regard. I want to be very clear that kind of what set me on this path of investigation and healing and curiosity was I had a very difficult childhood in certain ways. In other ways, it was wonderful. But I was in a situation where I was being hurt. And maybe you can relate to that, right? I grew up in a family of origin where I was being hurt, and I couldn't leave. I was being traumatized, and I couldn't leave. And so when you're stuck in a situation like that with your caregivers, and you can't leave, that can create what's known as complex PTSD. And so what is complex PTSD? We know classic PTSD is when is the veteran hears the gunshot in the woods from the deer hunter, and he's brought back to the battlefields of Iraq, right? For me, just bonding with another person, trying to connect with another person, having a long-term connection with someone, that brought me back to the battlefield of my childhood, if that makes any sense. So that was kind of my trigger, is being around other people and letting my guard down. And so, it's known as developmental trauma, relational trauma, whatever you want to call it. It's really hard to treat. And so, talk therapy, as you might imagine, brings up a lot of relational problems, right? It's a lot of therapists needed more help than I did. Maybe you can relate. You've had experienced that. And so, big pharma drugs didn't really work for me. And so I was really on a very difficult path, really a very self-destructive path. And so this book is about, Mothership is about how I kind of lived into the therapeutic use of psychedelics, how I lived into I guess you could say, a less Western way of thinking about healing and well-being, and just the world itself. So I grew up in Florida, and I have a dear friend who's here from Florida. She doesn't live in Florida now, but we grew up together. And so, Florida is, it's a complicated place, we know that. But families anywhere can be complicated. And so we would go to the Florida Keys as a family, and we would go snorkeling together. And I was 9. You weren't even born yet. I was 9, it was at 1989. And when we showed up at those reefs, they were already dying. And now coral coverage in Florida is down to 1%. The coral reefs of the Western Hemisphere have pretty much been decimated by rising ocean temperatures and from pollution. But when I showed up in 1989 to these reefs in the Florida Keys, they were still beautiful, but they were dying. And so that habitat that was beautiful yet under threat reminded me of my own habitat where I was growing up. And so, we have these weird moments or, weird associations in our mind, right? And so for me, the sadness I felt at those dying, beautiful reefs and the pain I felt growing up as a child, those became intertwined. And so my weird magical thinking was, if I could just snorkel or dive a virgin coral reef somewhere, I could be healed, right? The trauma circuitry could be pulled out of my brain. So there in Raja Ampat, as someone in his late 20s, early 30s, I started to go to Indonesia, and it was a good place to go. I mean, I made it a financial priority. My Visa card was difficult to pay off for a while. Let's put it that way. I made it an absolute priority because it was 10,000 miles away from my family of origin. And it had these reefs that were virgin, right? That were and are gorgeous. And you can see in those photographs what they look like. So those are some photographs that I took. These are some of the most biodiverse reefs in the world. There are walking sharks. There are sharks that walk around at low tide, and they hunt in the tide pools. They're pygmy seahorses you need a magnifying glass to see at about 60 feet down. Manta rays, 10 feet across. Dugongs. Do you know what a dugong is? What's a dugong? Anybody know? What is it? Like a manatee. Like a manatee, but on steroids. And it has a dolphin tail. And so I would see these sweet families of dugongs. And they didn't want to be around me because they're hunted where I was. So they skedaddled. But even that kind of reminded me of Florida, right? I grew up with manatees, but then to see dugongs, families of dugongs, it did something to me, right? It got in. I was away from my triggers. I was away from my addiction. Being in this place where there was no Wi-Fi, where it was so isolated, And I ate that. Somehow they would make me donuts. Somehow, in this very isolated place, they would make me donuts for breakfast, or I would eat rice and fish. That's pretty much it. And there I did allow my guard to drop down. And there I began to bond with Mother Earth herself. Right? I got to have a relationship with a being, and I got to feel safe. I got a taste of what sustained safety feels like in relationship with another creature. Like, you all are creatures. You know, a manta ray is a creature, coral is a creature. They're all creatures, right? And you know, when you're alone for that long and you're in silence that long, living this almost like monastic life there, sleeping on a mattress in a hut for weeks on end, I did feel nature. I felt very, very close to nature, and I felt also I felt loved by Mother Nature, because it was my mother who hurt me. And so to be underwater, to meet Mother Earth face to face, and holding space for one another, because you know what, the coral reefs also need our help. And so in a way I felt, you know, the reef felt as endangered and fragile as I sometimes felt. And, you know, and I was bonding with creatures that we are unintentionally helping to destroy. So it wasn't just love, bliss, right? There was also pain. I allowed, right, because to be in relationship means to feel pain as well. And so ecological compassion began to kind of awaken in me. And, but, you know, here's some more photographs. There are clear water mangroves there, and the coral reef comes right up to it. It's just unbelievable, folks. And yes, there are crocodiles there, but you know what? Somehow, being there underwater with crocodiles potentially coming out, that didn't feel as scary as being back in the United States. You sort of pay attention to what you pay attention to, right? And so it was just a really, really incredible place that I kept going back to. There's a seahorse. Not a pygmy seahorse, but a seahorse. Blue starfish. And meanwhile, the rest of the world's coral reefs are bleaching and dying, right? The Great Barrier Reef was bleaching and dying when I was here, and it was, you know, and it was so gorgeous. So I felt the ecological crisis, and yes, I was buoyed by being, pardon the pun, I was buoyed by being inside by being at these reefs, but I always had to come back home and to America, you know what I mean? And so I got older. And you know, when you have unfinished business, psychologically, and you get older, and as you reach 40, you begin to, I guess I had what we might call a midlife crisis. And I was walking a very suicidal path, honestly. And I was really scared for my well-being. And I, you know, and when you are scared about your well-being, and maybe you've been scared at times, you know, about your own well-being or the well-being of your fellow students. This is something as a professor I see all the time. You know, sometimes we go on Reddit, don't we? We go on Reddit and we look for the answer to our question. Yeah, right. Don't do this. What I'm about to tell you. Don't do this, okay? I don't want to get any emails in a year or two, okay? But I ended up going to a Peruvian ayahuasca center that had the most upvotes on Reddit. Don't you dare do that. Don't you dare. I was lucky. It was a gamble. And I should say, people shouldn't have to do that. This is what makes me mad, right? People should not have to look for an ayahuasca center on Reddit to go to because they don't have any other options, right? We know that 50,000 Americans have taken their lives. 50,000 Americans took their lives last year. 50,000, right? 150,000 veterans have taken their lives since 9/11. And 100,000 Americans died last year from opioid overdoses. It's unconscionable, abominable. Those adjectives don't really encompass this tragedy, right? And many of you have been to therapists, right, or had mental health crises, and you go and you try and seek treatment, and it is, let's say, suboptimal, oftentimes. And so when I went to the Amazon, I didn't go there as a Joe Rogan worshiping thrill seeker. I was not chasing the next high. I was not the person you would think who would, if you knew me in high school, you might not imagine that I would ever do something like this, but I did. And there in the Amazon, I began to make significant progress in clearing this trauma. All the while being remothered, and this is where the crumbling of paradigms and worldviews comes in, all the while being remothered by a mysterious, powerful entity many call Madre Ayahuasca and understand as Mother Earth herself. And so maybe, how many of you have ever read How to Change Your Mind by Michael Pollan? Anyone read that book? It's a great book. It's a wonderful book. And he's this very sober, sensible journalist. And so he writes that psychedelics are a Control-Alt-Delete for the brain. And that's a really good metaphor for what I experienced in the Amazon. It allows your brain to be much more malleable and much more coachable. And it gives you that mental flexibility so that you can revise these rigid, self-centered stories that are behind your addictions and your misery. And so writing this memoir, it really was an opportunity for me to take ownership over my story. Because the story I was telling myself, we all tell ourselves a certain story about who we are and where we've been and where we're going. And it's not always pretty because the shitty committee is usually writing the script. So being able to write this book was enormously healing because I finally got to see things in my past and see things about myself that were actually good, right? That I have strengths, that there were people there who loved me. Even the people who hurt me loved me so, so much. And that's the kind of paradox and, ambiguity that literature thrives on, as well as probably anthropology, right? You have to render people in their complexity. And I think that these medicines really help me to do that. And so this was a big part of this. So some benefits of ayahuasca that are supported by peer-reviewed research. There are 70 articles that are woven into my literary memoir based on psychedelic science and other fields. We know that it's a rapid antidepressant. We know that it quiets down that default mode network, all that, the shitty committee, just talking and talking. It slows down and quiets rumination. And, it can reprogram the fear response. It can disrupt the reconsolidation of traumatic memories. The list goes on and on. All those things, though, can't happen and sort of be carried forward by the patient unless they're in a safe environment, unless they're working with people who know what they're doing, right? This is not something you buy off the dark web and brew in your garage. Absolutely not. That would be the absolute worst thing you could possibly do. You have to be around people who know what they're doing. And oftentimes, those can be people who are indigenous, who are freely offering their medicines to some of us. So, but what about CPTSD though, right? You know that bonding with people was a real trigger for me, and you know, and in some ways it still is. And you know, it's hard to be in any kind of relationship with people because people are people. But I don't feel panic anymore, and so we know that the ayahuasca and other psychedelics allow the attachment centers of the brain to light up, as when we're deeply bonded to someone. That is good and bad news for someone who's got problems bonding with people, because it's good that it's targeting that part of the brain, right? But then you have to relive some of the panic and some of the fear and work through that. And it also, a medicine like ayahuasca returns us to a childlike brain, which again is good news for someone who needs a kind of do-over. Just like I went to Raja Ampat to have a kind of ecological do-over in terms of the degraded reefs in Florida. You know, with ayahuasca, I was able to have this do-over in terms of my brain, and so feeling like a child again, feeling like I'm bonding with this entity, which I can't believe I'm saying at a university, but you know what? It is what it is, right? So, and then I'll just, there's lots more to say, but I'll sort of cut it short here and just say too that there's this concept in a religion that is from Brazil. It's called Santa Daime, and I talk a lot about it in the book. And it is loosely Christian, and its sacrament is not wine, it is ayahuasca. And so in this particular church, one of the ideals is something called firmeza, which means firmness. And so what is firmness? Firmness is taking the one seat. It means having witness consciousness. It means settling into your being and practicing opening up to whatever comes your way. Something that was really hard for me to do. But I get to practice, with every ceremony, I get to practice in this very tightly controlled, skillfully controlled container. I get to practice staying put, not running, not leaving, staying and feeling all the different emotions that I had been running from, including love, right? Including tenderness, feeling the vulnerability of just being alive. All these things were things that I didn't want to feel and that so many people don't want to feel. And so, it's this deepening, reparenting relationship with Madre Ayahuasca that has helped transform me. And I kind of ended up bonding with the planet itself in the process. And this, in a way, she's kind of like my new parent. She is that mother who guides and protects me, but she's also in need of our protection as well as the climate crisis intensifies. And so she saved my life. If you, I'm not going to get into the nitty-gritty of my downward spiral up here, but she saved my life. And when someone or something saves your life, how can you not love her? How can you not want to work alongside the many other people on this planet, the millions of other people who are trying to save her, who are trying to save Mother Earth? And so that, for me, is part of the reciprocity that has grown from this path. And so CPTSD, relational trauma, things got so bad. I went through the coral reefs, and then I turned to ayahuasca, and then I was finally able to take in love. I was finally able to absorb the goodwill of others, interrupt my addictions, and I finally found that therapist I always needed. And she was always there inside me in a way. And so, I feel, yes, I do feel like so many, like we used to feel, right? We used to feel that we were in relationship with the earth. When we think about indigenous cultures and we think about, pre-industrialized societies, people worshiped the earth as their mother. And that we've lost that connection. And so I'm not special in trying to regain that. And it's something that many people feel, even in the West, they've attempted to do that. So I think that the thing that I would end with here is just to say, connection is the opposite of trauma. And that's my work, right? My work, all of our work, actually, is to connect with each other at a time when we are becoming more and more distracted and more distance from one another and othering our neighbors, right? They have a different sign up than we do, or they look different than us. And so society, civilization, I think, is that hard work of connection. And this path, this is my path towards actually being able to do that. And it's still hard. It's still hard. It's still hard to be alive, right? It's still hard to be alive, but I'm not hurting myself the way that I was. And that makes me rejoice. So I'm happy to take any questions that you might have about ayahuasca or about coral reefs or trauma and healing or anything that you wanted to ask me about. I'm happy to answer, especially from the anthropology students who might have anthropological questions that might get me thinking about this in a different way, Yes?
In a way, I kind of relate to you. I never had like an ayahuasca experience,
Yeah.
but a couple years ago, I did have one of those ego death control delete experiences.
You did?
Yeah, and it was just, I tapped into like my traumas and stuff, but it's like no matter how deep I get into that stuff, I always seem back to fall back to square one. I just feel like I'm just stressed out right now. Everything, just like I thought I came such a far away from this. It's like you have nothing to say.
Mm-hmm. Right, so it's like you experience that ego death, the problems on earth and in your life they seem inconsequential, you feel joy maybe, you feel some bliss, but then you kind of have to come back and do your laundry and deal with.
It's not only that.
Go to Dr. Jovi's class.
And deal with like maybe family members or reminders of the past.
I just feel like I'm trapped back in the system that I thought I escaped.
Yeah. And this is a big issue with psychedelic therapy, is integration. Because if someone is maybe in a situation that is not so great, right? Maybe you're in a family situation that's not great. Maybe you're in a financial situation that isn't right. Maybe you just don't feel safe where you are in your life. You have these mind-blowing experiences, but then you come back to that community that's suboptimal, let's say, that doesn't understand what you experienced. And it's very easy for those insights, those powerful insights that we have, like you had, for them to feel like a dream after a while. And they didn't really translate into big changes in our life. And so this is a real issue because people think it's a magic potion, but it isn't. The difference between, say, the Shipibo in Peru and us is that psychedelic medicines are integrated into their culture. It's not even a separate thing. It's just part of, it's like a drinking fountain. It's just, or baptism in a church. Like it's just, you don't question it. It's just part of existence, part of the culture. But we don't have that. And so it gets very, very compartmentalized. But see, in an indigenous context, someone has a journey and the whole, it's not weird, it's not strange in that community. And the whole community, in their human, uneven way, supports that person. We don't have that. And so this is a real problem in trying to translate some of these indigenous medicine practices into a Western kind of medical paradigm, if that makes any sense. It's a real issue. So integration is extremely important. And so what can we do to hold on to those insights and turn those insights into new ways of being, new practices, new habits? Because we've all got bad habits, right? Not so great habits. So how can we take these insights that say, hey, I'm a good person. I don't need to keep hurting myself. And how can we translate that into dropping those habits and doing something else? That's the million-dollar question. And I did some of that in my life. But again, it's still hard to be here. I still struggle. So that's a really great question. And I'm glad you had a great experience, though. And you'll never forget it, will you? Good. Glad you're safe with that. Okay, thanks. Hi. Paige.
On the topic of integration,
Yeah.
did you find it difficult in the beginning of your healing journey to integrate into the countries that you were in and visiting, to go through your healing journey? Did you think that was a barrier to starting it?
It was. So when I kind of embedded with the Santa Daime community in the rainforest, I talk about this in my book, I was given almost no orientation. Not throwing shade at whoever might be watching this video who was there, but I was given almost no orientation. I didn't know, for example, that you're not supposed to cross your legs. They organize the chairs really in a very regimented way. Women are on one side, men are on the other. I did not know that you should cross your legs. I didn't know that you couldn't leave the temple if you were freaking out. There were all these rules that I didn't know about. And the people who, this is their community, this is their religious, spiritual community, they didn't appreciate that. They didn't appreciate big, tall, goofy, dumb, white clown like me, not following the protocol for their religion. But I didn't know what the protocol was. And so I had to learn through trial and error what that was. And I don't speak Portuguese, I'm trying, but I certainly didn't speak Portuguese then. So that was a big, big barrier for me. That was a big barrier. And and that's why I'm trying to teach myself Portuguese, and I want to go back to Brazil. The next book is going to be sort of set more squarely in Brazil, because I want to be able to honor and respect what these communities are doing and not sort of flail around. So you've got to, I think, understanding the cultural context as well as you possibly can is a big part of receiving as much healing and being able to integrate. Because you might stay in that community for a while and integrate. So you got to know, you need to be a good observer as an anthropologist. It's a great question. It's a great question. And I always felt guilty, you know what I mean? I always felt like I didn't belong, I shouldn't be here, but they're happy to see me on some level. They're not, they're not. So it's complicated. So complicated. Any other questions? Yes, Professor De Giovine.
Can you take us through an ayahuasca ceremony a little bit? How did it get prepared?
Yeah?
How long it lasted? How sick you were? I don't know.
Well,
It's a very, maybe explain a little bit what that.
Sure.
What ayahuasca is for those who don't know.
well, I was about to say maybe you could hand me a bucket if I'm going to take you through this, but you don't know where. That's a bit of a exaggeration. Not everyone, barfs, but you do purge in some way usually, whether that's crying or shaking or the opposite of vomiting, if you know what I mean, the other way. So what ayahuasca is, it's a tea essentially. I mean, they say it's a tea. It's not really a tea. It's more like a chutney, I guess you could say. So you take it's very thick. So it has two ingredients. It has a vine. There's a vine called ayahuasca, which is confusing. The vine is called ayahuasca, and then there's a leaf that they put into the boiling pot of water also called chacruna, which is a plant that is related to the coffee plant. So sometimes when I'm drinking coffee, there are little notes of ayahuasca sometimes, and I have mixed feelings about that. Anyway, so you boil this for a long, long time, and it kind of boils down into this goo, and then it's prayed over as it's prepared. They have their own systems. Every culture has its own system for doing that, and then you are usually in a more traditional kind of Shipibo ceremony in the rainforest. You are not Sanadame, but in a more Shipibo ceremony, you are basically in the dark for about 4 to 6 hours, and you have a mat, like a little sleeping pad, and you you undergo something that you are maybe not prepared for, especially if you've never really done drugs like me. I didn't shroom when I was in high school. Let's put it that way. Okay. So I was really unprepared for what I experienced, but yes, like ego dissolution, seeing critters, let's say.
See a snake?
Did not see a snake, but I saw some dogs that were aliens, and saw some critters, but that frightened me. So that didn't. I somehow trained my mind not to see those anymore. But it was very frightening to see things. But it's the visionary experience of ayahuasca that is a big part of this. So my experiences haven't been all that visual, but seeing those visions is a big part of a Shipibo experience, and even they even call it painting. In their language they call it have a good painting. That would be their wishes to someone before they go on a journey. So and for me as someone who had PTSD, because ayahuasca is an anti-amnesic, which means it helps you remember things. It brought up these traumatic memories that I had been squashing down for years and years, and I got to relive some of these experiences. Thank goodness, because the only way you're going to let them go is to feel it. But it was very, very tough. It was very, very tough, and so it was a spiritual experience. Sometimes it was a shamanic experience. Sometimes, and then other times it felt very like the hard drive was being defragged, and my whole brain was being reorganized. And in some ways, to some small extent, that was happening. But and you might barf. But when you do barf, this is the best part, right? You get to connect, hopefully, you get to connect with what you're letting go of, right? So that terrible memory that makes you almost want to barf, well, here you've taken something that really will make you barf. And so when you do vomit into the bucket, you get to almost see that memory sometimes coming out of you, and it is so satisfying. I don't know how many of you like to pop pimples, but it's that kind of, wow, we've made some progress here kind of feeling. You asked. Yeah. but just a lot of things happen that you just can't prepare yourself for, and a lot of things defied my understanding of what's possible, and I have a very different view of life now. Very different view of life. I believe in magic, whatever that means. But I don't believe that this is the universe is random, and that I'm just some sort of like bubble doll automaton being knocked around in the pinball machine. I don't believe that for a second. I believe that, oh God, I was about to say it just like those bumper stickers say life is good. Yeah, kind of like that. Yeah, benevolence, yeah.
You said it was like community kind of setting. So like when you're like talking to this, like who was there to kind of help or guide you? Like say it went really wrong. Like you said, like you didn't know the rules. Like I couldn't leave if I wanted to. Like were there people like designated to kind of be like a sitter in a way?
Yes.
Okay.
Oh my gosh, yes. Babysitter. Basically, yeah, because, yes, and so there were some, I mean, I sat quite a few ceremonies, I needed a lot of assistance. So I would sometimes, this is just me, I guess, I just needed someone to hold my hand. Like, I just did not know how to feel what I was feeling. I was just so blunt, right? And so yes, there are people there who can hold your hand, there are people who give you a hug, maybe you don't want a hug, maybe you don't want to touch anyone, but they'll feel it out. You talk to someone if you need to. But there are always people there that you can turn to who can help you. And that made me feel safe, right? To know that I can turn to those people. And these people are patient. They're patient as can be. And they're saving lives. These folks really are. They really are saving lives. So sometimes you'll have a couple of, like in my case, there were two indigenous shamans at the center I went to in the Amazon. Two indigenous shamans, but then the staff are Westerners who understand trauma or understand psychology and trauma and things. And so, the things that I was saying were not confusing to them. Whereas if I told the shaman about complex PTSD, they wouldn't understand what that was. They had their own way of thinking about it. Well, yeah, but never do it alone. Never do it, because that's the other thing. So we felt like we've done it for so long alone. And you don't have to, right? You have to, it's a community, right? And all great things happen in the community, and especially something like that, which is so delicate and so special. It's such a precious window of time.
You said you did this a few times.
I've done it a few times.
After how many did you realize like it was more healing? Because in the beginning it probably was more just sensory and like dealing with their in terms of when did you feel comfortable going into it? Does that make sense?
Yeah. I'm never comfortable going into it. It's like skydiving.
Okay.
You know what I mean? I don't think a skydiver ever sort of says,
I'm right. You're
whatever. Maybe they do. But you just never know, because this entity has her own agenda. And it's an agenda because she sees through this is what psychedelics kind of do. They awaken that intelligence in you, that healing intelligence in you, and so you don't know what's on the syllabus for that class meeting, so to speak. And so bring your sharpened pencils, okay, and your notebook.
Yeah, thank you.
Sure. Yes.
Kind of with that, like, would you do anything with friends and like, try with your mind to stay? Because I feel like
Yes.
I've heard things when people into negative mindset like that for me to
Yes.
that experience.
So set and setting is what it's called, right? So having the best set and setting possible going into a ceremony is really important. And so for ayahuasca, you are instructed to be celibate for a few weeks, a couple weeks. You're supposed to avoid salt. You're supposed to avoid pork. There are different foods that are alcohol. You're not supposed to drink for several weeks beforehand. And that's to prepare your body for that, for the medicine, and so that there are no interactions. But then also, making sure that you're maybe not watching upsetting movies or those sorts of things. Making sure you go into it with as clear of a head as possible. And yeah, as it's been said, when you sign up for a ceremony, that's when the ceremony begins. So there are things that will come up. You may have arguments with your partner in the weeks leading up to it, and it's all part of that process. Because you are a little bit more raw.
You don't have your normal go-tos. So, Rocky Road ice cream is not on the menu necessarily, in the week before an ayahuasca ceremony. So how long? Well, they say 4 to 6 hours, and I think I said 4 to 6 hours a moment ago, but it can go on a long time, like 10 hours. It can go on a long time. And so it can be, but it's not necessarily 10 hours of agony either, right? No, like you can be having beautiful experiences, right? And medicine can show you what a valuable person you are, the contributions you can make in your life. It can show you your future self if you drop some habits that are getting in your way. So they're also great things, but it's a classroom, it's a training room. And I think when we go into it, and it's known as a plant teacher. They think of Mother Ayahuasca as a teacher. So if you go in with that kind of teachable mindset, then 10 hours, you'll be glad it's 10 hours, maybe except for.
You talk a lot about the spirituality.
Yeah.
We kind of worry about in Western society, really, and commodified stuff like this. We kind of worry about that in order to help people get access to ayahuasca.
Oh, definitely. Definitely. Because there are people they're Westerners who don't have a lot of training. Maybe you've heard about these people who don't have a lot of training, and some of them don't have a lot of integrity, unfortunately. And so, and they're charging a lot of money for these retreats that are essentially illegal, right? They're underground in the United States. And so, I do worry about it. I do worry about it. And, being on this book tour and talking to psychedelic societies across the country, I've met a range of characters, and you see, psychedelic communities are a mirror of humanity at large. And you see people using these medicines for the wrong reasons. And that's really unfortunate. That's really, really unfortunate. And so I think that the thing that has to enter into the conversation, which hasn't entered into the conversation enough, is that there has to be a very strong ethical framework. So keep your hands to yourself. One thing. Keep your hands to yourself. And, if there's supposed to be sacred silence, be silent. And, treat the medicine with respect, treat other people with respect. Don't lie, don't steal in that environment. And then that also is part of setting, right? Is knowing that there's an agreed upon ethical framework that people are agreeing to. And that oftentimes doesn't happen. Because it is a big tent and people are coming from all different traditions. But there are common sense ethical guidelines that need to be followed. Yeah.
So in this book, you write about experiences that you had to try to help with your healing. Would you say that writing the book was part of the healing too? Or
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
Being able to record the shift in my being, right? To record it on the page, and even if there was some major backsliding or whatever, I would at least know that it was real. That what I experienced was real. The transformation that I experienced had been real, even if it was temporary. And so that. And I think it also helped me come to terms with, literally helped me come to terms with it, right? It helped me articulate my personal trauma
Because when we are traumatized, telling a story is the hardest thing to do. Because we have a brain that is dissociating, right? We have a brain that doesn't want to remember certain things. And so to actually have the full story and to take ownership over those materials and create a coherent, affirming story about oneself, that has been like a really, really big deal for me. But I also had to go through a lot of pain, I think, in order to do that. I couldn't have done it when I was 22, or no, I needed to, it just wouldn't have been possible. So I think, but this is a different society too. This is a different era. And so it's interesting to me, you know, how I know young people are more open to this modality. And writing can be a really important integration tool. Very, very powerful integration tool. Because when we were gaslit as children, we didn't get to tell our stories. When we were silenced as children, we weren't able to tell our stories. And so to be an adult and to actually say, this is what happened. This is how I feel about it. And I have my own flair, my own style as a storyteller. Wada bing bang, right? Yow! Right? And I do it my way, everybody. Like there's something very empowering about that. So yeah, writing is can be a really powerful integration tool. And I'm just appreciating that now that the book is out in the world and the book tour is kind of winding down. I have some distance from it. I'm like, wow, I wonder if I just wrote this for myself. Maybe it's less for readers and more for myself, you know, to affirm to myself that I'm okay now, you know, I'm okay now. And maybe other people can benefit from hearing my story, I hope. We'll see.
You know, that gives a great segue. Do you mind if I ask Paul to say a couple words about your writing?
Gosh, that'd be great.
And then we can you know, bring it back to Greg. I also forgot to mention, you know, this is a book signing. There are books in the back. So if you wanted to purchase a copy and Greg would sign it, right?
Yeah.
And you could also talk with him as well. But yeah, Paul, did you want to say a couple words and then, you know, you could continue?
Well, good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
Thank you. So I really enjoyed reading your book, Greg, and because memoir is a very tricky genre to write. Very often memoirs are not very good. And the reason they're not good is because the person thinks that their experience is so special that they forget to talk about how that experience relates to something larger than himself or herself. So for me, reading the book, Greg uses his personal story to discuss much larger issues in the world, as he's articulated today. One of the greatest memoirs I ever read was by a guy named Stuart Alsop, and it was published a long time ago, 1970. It was about his battle with cancer, with leukemia, and that was really kind of moving. But the upshot of the book was he was a member of the WASP establishment of the 1950s and 60s, and he used his story of cancer to talk about the decline of the WASP establishment, a huge social movement. And so it was a very powerful way to get into that kind of sociological change. So this book is not just about trauma, it's not just about ayahuasca, it is about the climate crisis, which we're all experiencing. It is about the perception of nature. How do we, when we look at nature, what do we see? How do we see it? How has our experience shaped that perception? It is about the power of nature, right? I'll never forget being in Niger in West Africa and seeing a 100-foot sandstorm coming toward me. I took a photo of it, paid a huge price for it, And, you know, it's sort of obliterated the sun. And, you know, the idea of that kind of power coming at you without any, I took shelter in a straw hut and got a lot of sand, and it was a mess. But it demonstrated the power of nature, And for a lot of people in the world who don't have sort of the technological sophistication we have here in the West, you know, the way they deal with nature is through indigenous practices, right? So indigenous practices, and they say that when there's social harmony, there's harmony between the village and the bush, or there's harmony between social relations and, you know, relations of the people to the bush. When that happens, when nature is respected, then there's growth, there's health, there's vitality. More often than not, that's not respected, and what you get is the reverse. You get, you know, superstorms. You get, you know, Hurricane Milton, Hurricane Helene, etc., etc. So a lot of my, you know, this brings, what you were talking about brings out the importance of indigenous wisdom, especially in the contemporary context. We really need, I think, to listen to what indigenous healers have to say about human relations and about our relationship to nature, if we're going to heal ourselves, not just our personal selves, which is important, but also if we're going to heal the world, which is kind of sick right now. So there's power of nature. His book also describes the nature of awareness. How are we aware of what's around us, right? And some of his descriptions of an undersealed world were really beautifully written. And there's a book that I love the title of this book. It's by an artist. Her name is Jenny O'Neill. And the title of the book is How to Do Nothing. How to Do Nothing. Of course, the book is not about doing nothing. It means disassociating yourself and moving away from the sort of distractions that we have in culture to focus on the moment, to be present in the moment. A colleague of mine named Giovanna Parmigiana calls this the expanded presence. Expanded presence. In an expanded presence, our perception is heightened, just the way in ayahuasca, perception is heightened. And the other thing that it brought to me the notion of is the concept of attunement. Attunement is tuning your senses to what's around you. You know, it's focusing on receptivity, sensitivity, and appreciation for the wilder world around us. You know, about how human beings relate to nature. There are anthropological works that sort of correspond to that. There's one called How Forests Think, right? How Forests Think. And the other thing that I wanted to mention, two more things. One is this notion of attunement. There is a painter from the 20th century named Paul Klee, early 20th century. And he writes about how he paints a forest. And the way he paints the forest is, he says, I let the forest enter me. And if the forest enters me, then I have this sort of conversion, and I'm able to paint it as fully attuned to what the forest means and what it signifies. And so, you know, this is a step back from sort of mechanistic thinking and thinking in terms of linearity. Greg in his book also mentions the door. Right? So there's a door in many traditions. There's a door between social life and the spirit world, right? And the door is there. It's always there, and it opens in different ways. In your case, just through the ayahuasca ceremony. In many other societies, it opens through spirit possession. Right? So when you have a spirit possession ceremony, the past and the future, the linearity of time stops. The past and the future are fused. Right? And there is a fusion of the social world, and there's a fusion of the social world to the spirit world. In that moment, there is connection between people in a particular environment, but also there's a connection between people who feel a sense of how are they connected to the cosmos, how are they connected to nature, how does that work? And you get a kind of silent connection. Martin Buber, the great philosopher, called it the I-thou relationship, where there is dialogue between the person and the other, the person and nature, but it's a silent dialogue, a powerful kind of connection. And of course, this comes back to writing, because the purpose of writing a memoir or whatever, or an ethnographic text, is to connect the writer to the reader. How does the writer connect himself or herself to the reader? And in that connection, this is also the notion of anthropological fieldwork, is connecting, one connects oneself to a community over a period of time, learns through mistakes, and we all make mistakes. We learn through mistakes, and then we come to a greater understanding. I'll close, I can talk much more, but I won't. I just heard about this as a door to the spirit world. It's practiced in, I was told it was practiced in Italy, I think the south of Italy. And some people there believe that bees are the bridge between the social world and the spirit world. So when you see a bee, you should talk to it, or talk to him or her, I don't know. Talk to the bee. Talk to the bee, empty out, just sort of empty. Talk to the bee as if you're expressing your emotions, your concerns, your anxieties, and the bee will communicate that to the spirit world, and perhaps that will create a harmony that would enhance your life and give you a sense of well-being. Thanks.
So that's a really, thank you so much.
It really means a lot to me. So it's fitting to, I think, to end this presentation with this quote from Robin Wall Kimmerer. She is she's a moss expert. She's a botanist. She's also an indigenous writer, and she has this wonderful thing to say in her very famous book, Braiding Sweetgrass. So sort of ending the talk with this indigenous voice as well seems important. Knowing that you love the earth changes you, activates you to defend and protect and celebrate. But when you feel that the earth loves you in return, that feeling transforms the relationship from a one-way street into a sacred bond. And maybe that's that connection you're talking about, where the social world and the spirit world come together. And I think sometimes I was in the spirit world and I didn't necessarily know it. Sometimes I did, but it really, this is, I think, just a really another important articulation of what reciprocity might look like. This sacred bond, not this one-way street, but a sacred bond where there's mutual caring that takes many forms. So thank you so much for your attention and your great questions. I'm so impressed by you all. So impressed. And I look forward to talking to you afterwards, okay?